He believed he had seen every form of betrayal money could buy, until the night he found the kindest soul in his home freezing alone beneath the falling snow. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe dignity should never depend on someone's job title, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, back to Ethan Kang. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm golden light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly in the corner while politicians, business magnates, and foreign investors laughed over glasses of rare vintage wine. Every smile looked expensive. Every tailored suit reflected power. Outside, however, winter had swallowed the estate in silence. Thick snow drifted across the gardens, burying stone pathways beneath an endless sheet of white. Ethan Kang stood at the head of the dining table, his expression unreadable as another guest praised the flawless organization of the evening. At 36, the Korean Mafia Boss had built an empire feared across continents. Men twice his age lowered their voices when he entered a room. Rivals disappeared after underestimating him. Yet tonight, despite the luxury surrounding him, something felt wrong. It wasn't the music. It wasn't the food. It wasn't even the carefully rehearsed conversations designed to impress him. It was the strange emptiness lingering somewhere beyond the windows. Across the room, servants moved like silent shadows, replacing dishes before anyone noticed they were empty. None dared interrupt the guests. None looked up. Among them, one face was missing. Alyssa Brooks. She had worked inside the Kang estate for barely 3 weeks. Most guests wouldn't have remembered seeing her at all. She spoke little, kept her eyes lowered, and completed every task before anyone asked. The older staff often joked that she was invisible. Ethan had never joined those jokes. Without knowing exactly why, he had noticed the young Black Maid from her very first morning. Not because she demanded attention, but because she never did. She greeted every employee with quiet respect, thanked the kitchen staff after every meal, and somehow managed to smile even after carrying laundry baskets heavier than herself through endless hallways. Tonight, though, she was nowhere inside the mansion. A sudden gust of wind rattled the tall dining room windows. One guest glanced toward the glass before continuing his story. Nobody else cared. Then something caught Ethan's eye. Near the far edge of the snow-covered courtyard, a dark silhouette, barely visible beneath the swirling storm. His conversation stopped in the middle of a sentence. At first, he thought it was one of the gardeners securing decorations against the weather. But the figure didn't move. Another blast of icy wind swept across the estate. The silhouette staggered, then slowly collapsed onto one knee. Ethan's heartbeat changed. Without realizing it, he stepped toward the window. The room continued laughing behind him. Crystal glasses clinked together. Someone proposed another toast. No one noticed what he had seen. His hand reached the cold glass. Snowflakes blurred his vision for a brief second before the wind shifted. There, curled against the frozen stone wall, still wearing nothing but a thin Black Maid's uniform, was Alyssa Brooks. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her lips had turned pale. Snow covered her shoulders like a burial cloth. She wasn't hiding from the cold anymore. She was losing to it. For one endless heartbeat, Ethan Kang simply stared. Then every trace of calm disappeared from his face. The crystal wineglass slipped from his hand. It shattered across the marble floor. The music stopped. The laughter died. And before a single guest understood what had happened, the most feared man in the room was already running toward the snow. By the time Ethan Kang reached the front steps, the snow had already buried the footprints that had led Alyssa Brooks into the storm, as if the winter itself wanted to erase what someone inside his own house had done. The icy wind struck his face with brutal force the moment the massive oak doors swung open. Expensive leather shoes crunched through fresh snow as he crossed the courtyard without slowing down. Behind him, bodyguards exchanged confused glances before rushing after their boss. None of them had ever seen Ethan abandon an important dinner. Certainly not without saying a word. Alyssa, his voice cut through the blizzard. There was no response. Only the mournful whistle of winter sweeping across the marble statues and frozen fountains. She was still curled against the stone wall where he had seen her from the dining room. Snow clung to her tightly braided hair and covered her shoulders until she almost blended into the white landscape. Her thin Black Maid's uniform offered no protection against the freezing temperature. Her trembling had nearly stopped, and somehow that frightened Ethan even more. People stopped shivering when their bodies began surrendering. He dropped to one knee without hesitation. Alyssa. His voice was quieter now. He gently brushed the snow from her face. Her skin was frighteningly cold. Tiny crystals clung to her eyelashes. Her lips had turned a pale shade of blue. When his fingers touched her wrist, he struggled to find a pulse. It was there. Weak. Painfully weak. Without thinking, Ethan shrugged off his heavy wool overcoat, the custom-made coat worth more than some families earned in months, and wrapped it completely around her fragile body. Only then did Alyssa's eyelids flutter. Mr. Kang. Her voice barely existed. I'm sorry. Sorry. The words hit Ethan harder than the freezing wind. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't crying. She wasn't blaming anyone. She was apologizing, as though nearly freezing to death had somehow been her fault. No, Ethan said firmly, sliding one arm beneath her knees and another behind her back. Don't speak. She instinctively tried to pull away. I'll make your coat wet. For a brief second, Ethan simply stared at her. Even now, even while her body was shutting down, she was worried about ruining his coat. Something tightened inside his chest. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, far lighter than he expected, far lighter than someone working 12-hour shifts should have been. One of the bodyguards finally reached him. Boss, should I call an ambulance? No. Ethan never took his eyes off Alyssa. Call Dr. Han. Tell him to prepare the medical suite. Now. The guard immediately pulled out his phone. As Ethan carried Alyssa toward the mansion, another detail caught his attention. Her hands. The skin around her fingers was cracked. Tiny cuts covered her knuckles. Old bruises had faded into yellow beneath her dark skin. Those weren't injuries from tonight. Those had been there for days. How had no one reported this? How had no one noticed? Or worse, had everyone noticed and chosen to ignore it? The grand doors opened before he reached them. Warm air spilled into the entrance hall, but Ethan barely felt it. Guests standing near the foyer froze at the sight before them. The city's most feared mafia boss, holding a shivering maid in his arms with the same care a father might carry an injured child. Whispers spread instantly. What happened? Who is she? Was she outside? Nobody answered. Sophia, the head housekeeper, hurried forward, forcing a nervous smile. Mr. Kang, I can take her from no. His single word echoed through the marble hall. Cold. Controlled. Absolute. Sophia stopped immediately. For the first time in years, she felt genuine fear. Ethan slowly turned his head toward every servant gathered near the entrance. No shouting. No threats. Only one terrifying question. Who gave the order for her to be outside? Silence. No one moved. No one even dared breathe. Because every person in that hallway understood one thing. The snowstorm outside was no longer the coldest place in the Kang estate. There are moments when an entire room tells the truth without anyone saying a single word. Ethan Kang had learned to recognize those moments long before he built his empire. The entrance hall stood frozen, not because of the winter outside, because of the silence inside. More than 30 employees lined the marble corridor, their eyes lowered, hands clasped tightly before them. No one dared look directly at the man carrying Alyssa through the doorway. Even the guests lingering near the grand staircase instinctively stepped aside, sensing they were witnessing something far more dangerous than anger. Dr. Han appeared. Almost immediately, medical bag already in hand. This way, Mr. Kang. Ethan carried Alyssa into the private medical suite located on the mansion's second floor. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and cedarwood. Soft amber lights replaced the cold brilliance of the ballroom chandeliers. As nurses carefully transferred Alyssa onto the examination bed, Ethan finally stepped back. His overcoat remained wrapped around her. He made no attempt to take it back. The doctor quickly checked her pulse, blood pressure, and body temperature. His expression grew more serious with every passing second. Core temperature is dangerously low, Dr. Han said quietly. She's suffering from moderate hypothermia. Another 20 or 30 minutes outside. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ethan understood perfectly. The doctor continued directing the nurses. Warm 4 fluids. Thermal blankets. Slow rewarming only. No sudden heat. Machines hummed softly as warm air filled the room. For the first time since lifting Alyssa from the snow, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. Only then did he notice her shoes. They weren't winter shoes. The thin soles had nearly separated from the leather. One heel had been repaired with cheap black thread. Snowmelt dripped steadily onto the polished floor beneath them. She had spent hours working inside one of the wealthiest homes in New York wearing shoes that could barely survive the season. His jaw tightened. When was the last time she ate? He asked without looking away from her. No one answered. Not because they didn't hear him. Because no one knew. That realization disturbed him even more. She lived under his roof. Worked under his name. Yet no one could answer such a simple question. The monitor beside Alyssa suddenly emitted a soft, uneven beep. Her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. A faint whisper escaped her lips. I'm sorry. Again. Those same two words. The nurse leaned closer. She's delirious. But Ethan heard every syllable. Sorry. Not help me. Not I'm cold. Not don't leave me. Only an apology. As though years had taught her that existing was an inconvenience. Ethan slowly turned toward Dr. Hahn. Stay with her. I will. Whatever she needs. Of course. Without another word, Ethan left the medical suite. The heavy door closed behind him with a muted click. Outside, the warmth disappeared instantly. Waiting in the hallway stood Sophia, the head housekeeper. Beside her were the butler, the kitchen supervisor, 3 senior maids, and nearly every employee who had worked that evening. None spoke first. Sophia finally forced herself to step forward. Mr. Kang, I can explain. He looked at her. Nothing more. No raised voice. No visible anger. Yet Sophia felt every carefully prepared sentence vanish from her mind. You can? Ethan asked quietly. Yes, sir. Good. His voice remained calm. So explain why a member of my household was freezing to death on my property. Sophia swallowed. There was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Yes, sir. The guests were arriving. We needed every hallway to appear perfect. Alyssa accidentally spilled wine while helping in the dining room. Ethan said nothing. Sophia continued, desperate now. I only told her to wait outside until someone brought another uniform. How long? How long? Her breathing became uneven. I don't remember. You don't remember. No, sir. One of the younger housemaids standing behind Sophia suddenly closed her eyes. Another lowered her head even farther. Fear was spreading. Not because Ethan had threatened anyone. Because the truth was beginning to surface. Ethan slowly shifted his gaze across every employee gathered in the corridor. I'll ask once. His voice barely rose above a whisper. If anyone here believes that story. He paused. Look me in the eyes. No one moved. No one dared. The hallway became so quiet that the distant rhythm of Alyssa's heart monitor could almost be heard through the closed door. And in that unbearable silence, Ethan Kang realized something far worse than negligence had happened inside his own home. The most dangerous lies are never spoken loudly. They survive because everyone in the room agrees to remain silent. Ethan's gaze lingered on the faces before him. One by one. The butler. The housekeepers. The kitchen staff. The security team assigned to the service entrance. Years of leading an empire had taught him something invaluable. Fear made guilty people look away. Conscience made innocent people hesitate. Tonight, nearly everyone lowered their eyes. But one person couldn't. Near the back of the hallway stood a young kitchen assistant named Olivia. She couldn't have been older than 22. Her hands trembled so violently that a folded dish towel slipped from her fingers onto the polished floor. The sound echoed through the corridor. Sophia shot her a warning glance. Olivia bent to retrieve it. Leave it. Ethan's calm voice stopped her. She froze. Look at me. Slowly, she obeyed. Tears already shimmered in her eyes. What happened? Olivia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Sophia stepped forward immediately. Mr. Kang, she's new. She doesn't know anything. I wasn't asking you. The hallway fell silent again. Olivia's breathing became uneven. She looked toward Sophia, then toward the closed medical room where Alyssa was fighting to stay alive. Finally, she made her choice. It wasn't an accident. Every heartbeat in the corridor seemed to stop. Sophia's face drained of color. Olivia, I'm sorry. The young woman began crying. I can't lie anymore. Ethan remained perfectly still. Continue. Olivia wiped her tears. Alyssa didn't spill the wine. Nobody interrupted her now. The guest dropped the glass himself. Her voice shook with every sentence. It splashed on her uniform because she stepped between him and a child carrying hot soup. Several employees exchanged startled glances. They hadn't known that part. The guest became angry. He said the stain ruined his evening. He demanded someone remove her immediately. Sophia whispered through clenched teeth. Enough. But Olivia kept going. You told Alyssa she embarrassed the household. You ordered her to stand outside until every guest finished dinner. Sophia's voice rose. I told her 20 minutes. Olivia looked directly at Ethan. It wasn't 20. It had already been over 2 hours. The words landed like stones. 2 hours. Outside. In a snowstorm. Without a coat. Without gloves. Without permission to come back inside. Ethan didn't react. Not outwardly. Yet every person standing there sensed the temperature around him had somehow become even colder. Who checked on her? No answer. Who brought her a blanket? Silence. Who gave her hot tea? Nothing. Olivia quietly lowered her head. No one, sir. The sentence lingered in the hallway long after she finished speaking. No one. Not one employee. Not one supervisor. Not one member of a household built upon discipline and loyalty. The realization settled heavily over Ethan. This wasn't simply cruelty. It was indifference. The kind of cruelty that spread because ordinary people convinced themselves someone else would intervene. Sophia finally found her voice. Mr. Kang, I was protecting the reputation of the estate. He looked at her for a long moment, then asked quietly, by sacrificing hers? Sophia couldn't answer. You believed the guests would be uncomfortable seeing a maid wearing a stained uniform. She nodded weakly. So you decided they would be more comfortable if she froze outside instead. No accusation. No raised voice. Only facts. Facts were harder to escape. Several guests had quietly gathered at the far end of the hallway, drawn by the silence. Their earlier laughter had vanished completely. One elderly businessman slowly removed his glasses. Another woman covered her mouth. They had attended countless extravagant dinners hosted by powerful men. They had witnessed threats, arguments, even violence. But this? Watching the master of the estate dismantle someone's excuses with nothing but calm questions, felt infinitely more terrifying. Just then, the medical room door opened. Dr. Han stepped into the hallway. Mr. Kang. Every head turned. She's stable. A quiet breath escaped the corridor. But the doctor hesitated. When she regains consciousness, she may experience emotional distress. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Dr. Han looked towards Sophia before answering. Patients who repeatedly apologize while unconscious often do so because they've spent a very long time believing they deserve mistreatment. No one spoke. The doctor's words revealed wounds no thermometer could measure. Ethan slowly closed his eyes. Not from exhaustion, from disappointment. Because in that single moment, he realized Alyssa hadn't nearly died from the cold alone. She had been freezing long before the snow ever began to fall. For years, people believed Ethan Kang's greatest weapon was his power. They were wrong. His greatest weapon was the certainty that justice would arrive without warning. No one left the hallway. No one dared. Sophia stood motionless, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack beneath the unbearable weight of silence. Around her, employees avoided looking in her direction. The guests remained near the staircase, speaking only in whispers. The luxurious mansion, filled with priceless artwork and imported marble, suddenly felt like a courtroom. Ethan slowly slipped his hands into the pockets of his black trousers. His breathing was steady, his expression unreadable. Those who knew him best understood what that meant. When Ethan shouted, there was still room for mercy. When he became this calm, someone's world was about to collapse. Bring everyone to the security room, he said. The order was quiet, absolute. Within minutes, the household's senior staff, security supervisors, and several guests who had witnessed the evening gathered inside the surveillance center beneath the mansion. Dozens of monitors covered one wall, displaying every corridor, hallway, entrance, and service area recorded by the estate's cameras. The head of security hurried to the controls. Mr. Kang, which recording would you like to review? Everything. The man swallowed. Start 12 hours ago. The footage began rolling. Morning preparations. Florists decorating the ballroom. Chefs unloading ingredients. Housekeepers polishing silver. Employees moving with practiced precision. Hour after hour, Ethan watched without interruption. Nobody complained. Nobody shifted impatiently. The only sounds came from humming monitors and the occasional click of a keyboard. Then, at exactly 5:43 p.m., the dining hall camera revealed Alyssa. She carried a tray of crystal glasses with careful hands while weaving through arriving guests. A little boy suddenly darted across the room. He stumbled. A bowl of steaming soup slipped toward him. Without hesitation, Alyssa abandoned the tray and caught the child before the boiling liquid reached his face. The crystal glasses shattered across the marble floor. A splash of red wine stained the front of her uniform. The child was unharmed. His mother embraced him in relief. For one brief moment, Alyssa smiled. Then the footage showed another figure entering the frame. A wealthy investor. His polished shoes now speckled with tiny drops of wine. His expression twisted with irritation. Although the cameras recorded no sound, his body language spoke clearly enough. He pointed at the stain, pointed at Alyssa, demanded something. Sophia rushed over immediately. She bowed apologetically, then turned toward Alyssa. Her smile disappeared. She pointed toward the service exit. One sharp gesture. No compassion. No hesitation. Alyssa lowered her head. She nodded once and quietly walked away. The room watching the recording remained silent. The footage switched to the exterior camera. Snow had already begun falling. At first, Alyssa stood beneath the covered entrance, hugging herself for warmth. She waited patiently. 5 minutes. 10. 20. Employees passed through the doorway several times. Some looked directly at her. None stopped. One chef even carried trays of hot food past her twice. Not once did anyone offer her a coat, or a blanket, or a single cup of coffee. Time continued moving. The snowfall grew heavier. The wind became harsher. Eventually, Alyssa's knees began shaking. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. Still, she stayed exactly where she had been ordered. Not because someone was watching. Because she believed leaving would mean disobeying. A young security guard suddenly covered his face with one hand. Another maid quietly wiped away tears. Even several guests looked visibly uncomfortable. The recording continued. 1 hour. Then another. Finally, the image everyone dreaded appeared. Alyssa slowly slid down against the frozen stone wall. She tried standing. Failed. Tried again. Failed once more. Then curled into herself as snow settled across her shoulders. The exact moment Ethan had seen her through the dining room window. The video ended. No one spoke. No one searched for excuses anymore. The evidence had stripped every lie away. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the dark monitor long after the screen froze. When he finally turned around, his gaze settled on Sophia. You didn't forget her. His voice was almost gentle. You left her there. Sophia's lips trembled. I never thought. No, he interrupted softly. You never cared enough to think. Those words struck harder than any scream. The room became unbearably still, because everyone present understood the truth. This night would no longer be remembered as the evening a maid nearly froze to death. It would be remembered as the night Ethan Kang discovered that the greatest threat inside his empire had never come from an enemy. It had been living under his own roof all along. Justice rarely begins with punishment. It begins the moment someone finally decides that another human being's dignity is worth protecting. The surveillance room emptied in complete silence. No one had been dismissed. No one had been forgiven. They simply waited. Waiting was often more terrifying than hearing a verdict. Ethan walked alone through the mansion's long central corridor. His footsteps echoed against the marble floor where only hours earlier guests had laughed beneath sparkling chandeliers. The orchestra had packed away their instruments. Half-finished wine glasses still rested on silver trays. The celebration had ended without anyone announcing its conclusion. Power had changed the atmosphere more quickly than music ever could. As Ethan passed the dining room, he stopped. The enormous banquet table remained exactly as it had been left. Roasted duck, imported caviar, freshly baked bread, crystal bowls overflowing with fruit. Enough food to feed dozens of families. Outside those same windows, Alyssa had nearly frozen to death while apologizing for existing. He stood motionless for several seconds, then quietly spoke to the butler standing nearby. How many employees work tonight? 48, sir. Did every one of them eat dinner? The butler hesitated. I believe so. You believe? Another pause. No, sir. Ethan slowly turned. Who didn't? The man lowered his eyes. Alyssa. The answer came almost as a whisper. When was her meal served? It wasn't. The silence that followed seemed endless. Not because Ethan appeared angry. Because he didn't. His face remained perfectly composed. That frightened everyone even more. Prepare one table. The butler blinked. Sir. One table. For whom? Ethan looked toward the empty dining hall. For her. Confusion spread across the servants' faces. Within minutes, the largest table in the mansion had been cleared. The expensive centerpieces were removed. Fresh candles were lit. Simple dishes replaced elaborate decorations. Warm soup, fresh bread, tea, fruit. Nothing extravagant. Just the kind of meal every person deserved after a day's work. Employees watched from the edges of the room, uncertain why their employer was arranging a dinner for someone still unconscious upstairs. Then Ethan gave another order. Every employee, heads lifted, sit. No one moved. They assumed they had misunderstood. I said. His voice remained calm. Sit. The butler nervously pulled out a chair. One by one, cooks, cleaners, gardeners, drivers, security guards, and housekeepers slowly took seats around the massive table they had spent years serving but had never been allowed to use. Sophia remained standing. Ethan noticed. You too. She hesitated. I don't deserve, no. He interrupted. You don't. Another long silence. But you will sit anyway. She obeyed. Not out of comfort. Out of fear. Ethan remained standing at the head of the table. For the first time, every employee looked at the dining room from the guest side instead of the servant's side. It felt unfamiliar. Almost forbidden. Ethan allowed the silence to settle before speaking. When I was 12, every head lifted. Very few people knew anything about Ethan's childhood. My father worked 18 hours a day. His voice was steady. Table. But told her she wasn't allowed to eat the leftovers. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable looks. I asked her once why she never complained. His eyes settled on the untouched bowl of soup prepared for Alyssa. She said. He paused. People can take away comfort. They can never take away dignity unless you surrender it yourself. Another silence. This house has become wealthy. His gaze hardened. But somewhere along the way, it became poor. No one misunderstood what he meant. It became poor in character. Sophia quietly began crying. Not dramatic sobs. Just silent tears she could no longer hide. Ethan continued. Power exists for one reason. His voice carried through every corner of the room. To protect those who have less of it. He looked toward each employee individually. If my home becomes a place where the weakest person fears the strongest. He stopped. Then it is no longer my home. No applause followed. No one dared speak. At that exact moment, the dining room doors opened. Dr. Han stepped inside. A faint smile crossed his tired face. Mr. Kang. Every person stood instinctively. She's awake. The room fell silent once again. But this silence was different. For the first time that night, it carried something that had been missing since the snow began to fall. Hope. Sometimes the smallest question can heal wounds that years of suffering never could. The medical suite was quiet except for the gentle rhythm of the heart monitor. Warm air flowed softly through hidden vents. The snowstorm outside continued pressing against the tall windows, but inside, the room had become a sanctuary of light. Alyssa Brooks slowly opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar. For several long seconds, she simply stared, trying to remember where she was. Then panic rushed into her expression. She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her arms. The foreline tugged gently at her wrist. No. Her voice was barely audible. I have to finish cleaning. A nurse immediately placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Easy. You need to rest. Alyssa looked around frantically. The guests. My shift. I wasn't finished. Each sentence became weaker than the last. Dr. Han exchanged a quiet glance with Ethan, who had been standing silently near the window ever since she regained consciousness. He had not interrupted. He had not spoken. He simply watched. The doctor nodded almost imperceptibly. Ethan walked toward the bed. His footsteps were slow enough that they wouldn't startle her. Alyssa finally noticed him. Fear instantly replaced confusion. She struggled to pull the blanket aside. I'm so sorry, Mr. Kang. She tried to climb out of bed despite the weakness in her body. I'll go back to work. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Her hands shook violently as she attempted to remove the medical sensors attached to her fingers. I'm sorry the guests had to see. Before she could finish, Ethan gently reached forward and stopped her trembling hand. Not forcefully, carefully, as though touching something fragile. You are not going anywhere. His voice remained calm. Alyssa lowered her eyes. I deserve the punishment. The room fell completely silent. Even the nurses stopped moving. Ethan studied her face. There was no anger, no resentment, only genuine belief. She truly thought she deserved what had happened. The realization hurt more than any betrayal he had witnessed that night. He slowly pulled a chair beside her bed and sat down. For the first time since becoming one of the most feared men in the city, he spoke not as a boss, not as a leader, simply as another human being. Alyssa. She looked up hesitantly. When was the last time you ate? She blinked. The question seemed to confuse her. She searched her memory. I don't remember. The answer landed quietly inside the room. Not dramatic, not loud, just painfully honest. Ethan asked another question. Are you hungry? She stared at him, as though she had never expected anyone to ask. Then, almost instinctively, she apologized again. I'm sorry. The words escaped before she could stop them. Tears immediately filled her eyes. I always make extra work for everyone. I shouldn't have dropped the tray. I shouldn't have ruined dinner. I should have been more careful. Each apology became softer, smaller, until they dissolved into silent tears. Ethan didn't interrupt. He let every word settle into the room, because every apology revealed another invisible scar. Finally he spoke. You saved a child. Alyssa looked at him in disbelief. The cameras recorded everything. You prevented boiling soup from falling on him. She shook her head. I broke the glasses. You saved a child. My uniform was stained. You saved a child. The guests were embarrassed. You saved a child. His voice never became louder. It didn't need to. With every repeated sentence, one lie she had carried inside herself began to lose its power. Alyssa's shoulders started trembling. No one had ever repeated kindness to her with such certainty. She covered her face. The tears she had held back for years finally escaped. Not because she was in pain, but because someone had refused to let her define herself by the punishment others had given her. Ethan quietly reached toward the bedside table. The simple meal he had ordered was still warm. Soup, fresh bread, tea, nothing luxurious, just comfort. He slid the tray gently toward her. I prepared dinner for you. Alyssa stared at the food. Her lips quivered. You? Her voice broke. You remembered? Ethan looked at her steadily. No, he answered softly. I realized I should have remembered much sooner. The room became perfectly still. Even Dr. Han lowered his eyes, because everyone present understood that this wasn't simply about one missed meal. It was about a woman who had spent so long believing she was invisible, that being offered a warm bowl of soup felt almost impossible to believe. And for the first time since entering the Kang estate, Alyssa Brooks accepted something without apologizing first. Real change is never measured by how severely the guilty are punished. It is measured by how safely the innocent are allowed to live afterward. Morning arrived quietly over the Kang estate. The snowstorm had finally ended. Sunlight reflected across untouched blankets of white, transforming the frozen gardens into something almost peaceful. Anyone driving past the mansion would have believed it had been an ordinary winter night. Only those inside knew the house itself had changed forever. Alyssa remained in the medical suite, still recovering her strength. Dr. Han insisted she stay in bed for another day, and for the first time in years, she obeyed an order without apologizing for needing rest. Downstairs, however, every employee had received an unexpected message. Mandatory assembly. 9 o'clock. Main ballroom. No exceptions. Whispers filled the corridors long before the meeting began. Some believed Ethan would dismiss half the staff. Others expected lawyers, police, security interrogations. Sophia had barely slept. She sat alone in a corner before everyone arrived, staring silently at the polished floor where guests had danced only hours before. Her confidence had disappeared. For the first time in her career, titles and authority offered no protection. At exactly 9, the ballroom doors opened. Ethan Kang entered alone. No bodyguards, no advisors, no lawyers. He walked slowly toward the front of the room, while nearly 50 employees stood in complete silence. The atmosphere felt heavier than the previous night's storm. Ethan looked across the familiar faces. People who had worked in his home for years. People he believed he knew. Then he spoke. Yesterday, His calm voice echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers. A woman almost died in this house. Nobody moved. Not because there wasn't enough money. His eyes swept across the extravagant room. Not because there wasn't enough food. He glanced toward the kitchens. Not because there weren't enough people. Another pause. She almost died because compassion became optional. Those words settled over every employee like fresh snowfall. Ethan continued. That ends today. The large doors behind him opened. Several assistants entered carrying neatly organized folders. One was placed into the hands of every employee. Confused murmurs spread through the ballroom. The cover read only 3 words. House Dignity Charter. Ethan waited until everyone held a copy. Effective immediately. He raised his eyes. No employee will eat after the guests. Several people blinked in surprise. Everyone will have scheduled meal breaks. No exceptions. Another page. Every employee will receive winter uniforms appropriate for outdoor conditions. Another. Medical care will be available without supervisor approval. Another. No member of this household will ever again be denied warmth, food, or rest because of status. He allowed each sentence to settle before continuing. If anyone believes these rules are inconvenient, he closed the folder in his hand. They are free to leave today. No one moved. Not even Sophia. There will also be another change. He looked toward the long dining hall visible through the open doors. Every Sunday evening, he said quietly, the staff and I will share one meal together. The room fell completely silent. Some employees stared at him in disbelief. The gardeners looked at the cooks. The cooks looked at the cleaners. None of them had ever imagined sitting at the same table as the owner of the estate. Ethan noticed their expressions. This table has always been large enough. His voice softened. The problem was never space. It was perspective. Across the room, Olivia lowered her head as tears filled her eyes once again. Not from fear, from relief. She finally understood that speaking the truth had not destroyed the household. It had saved it. Ethan closed the folder. There is one final rule. Every eye lifted toward him. If I ever discover another employee standing silent while someone is treated without dignity. He paused. I will consider the silence as guilty as the cruelty. No threats followed. None were necessary. Everyone understood. A mansion could be rebuilt. A reputation could be restored. But a person's dignity, once abandoned by those around them, carried scars that lasted far longer than winter. Far above the ballroom, Alyssa quietly stood beside the medical suite window. Wrapped in a warm blanket, she watched sunlight melt the snow covering the courtyard where she had nearly lost her life. She did not know everything Ethan had changed downstairs. Not yet, but for the first time since arriving at the Kang estate. She looked at the world outside the glass, and it no longer felt cold. The world remembers powerful people for the fear they inspire, but only a few are remembered for the dignity they choose to protect. 3 months passed. Winter surrendered to the first gentle signs of spring. The heavy snow that had once buried the gardens of the Kang estate had melted into quiet streams that wound through newly blooming flowers. Birds returned to the old oak trees. Warm sunlight replaced the bitter wind that had nearly stolen one woman's life. From the outside, the mansion looked exactly as it always had. Inside, nothing was the same. The long dining table, once reserved only for influential guests, now welcomed every employee each Sunday evening. Gardeners laughed with chefs. Drivers exchanged stories with housekeepers. The invisible line that had divided servants from everyone else had slowly disappeared. Not because someone had ordered people to care, because they had finally learned how. Alyssa Brooks walked through the corridors carrying fresh flowers instead of exhaustion. The dark circles beneath her eyes had faded. Her smile appeared more often now, and perhaps most noticeably, she had stopped apologizing every time someone spoke to her. One quiet afternoon, Ethan Kang stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. He watched employees preparing for the weekly meal together. Dr. Han stepped beside him. You were right. Ethan glanced at him. About what? The body healed much faster than her heart. The doctor smiled softly. But now, he looked toward Alyssa, who was helping a young gardener arrange flowers while laughing at something he had said. I think they're finally healing together. Ethan remained silent. Not because he disagreed. Because some victories deserved silence more than celebration. Behind them, footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Sophia approached. She looked different. The confidence that once bordered on arrogance had been replaced by quiet humility. She stopped several feet away. I wanted to thank you. Ethan didn't answer immediately. She continued. I spent years believing leadership meant demanding perfection. Her voice trembled. I never realized it also meant protecting people. She lowered her eyes. I failed. Yes. His answer was calm. You did. She accepted the words without defending herself. I don't expect forgiveness. Another pause. I only hope to spend the rest of my career becoming someone worthy of the second chance you gave me. Ethan studied her for a moment, then simply nodded. Make sure no one else ever needs one. She understood exactly what he meant. That afternoon, another young woman arrived at the estate for her first day of work. She stood nervously near the entrance, clutching a small bag filled with everything she owned. Her shoes were worn. Her coat was too thin for the lingering cold. She reminded several employees of someone else. Before anxiety could overwhelm her, Alyssa walked toward the newcomer with a warm smile. Welcome. The young woman hesitated. I've never worked somewhere like this. Alyssa gently took the bag from her hands. Neither had I. She pointed toward the dining hall. Come on. It's almost lunch. The new employee looked confused. I should wait until everyone else finishes. Alyssa smiled even wider. Not here. Those two simple words carried the weight of everything that had changed. From the balcony above, Ethan watched them disappear through the open doors together. No speeches. No applause. Just one human being making sure another would never experience the loneliness she once endured. The late afternoon sun poured through the mansion windows, filling every hallway with warm golden light. Months earlier, those same windows had framed the image of a woman freezing alone in the snow. Now they reflected something entirely different. People greeting one another by name. Shared laughter. Open doors. Warm meals. Quiet respect. Power had not disappeared from the Kang estate. It had finally discovered its purpose. Ethan turned away from the balcony and walked back inside without another word. He no longer needed to watch over every corner of the house, because dignity had become part of its foundation. And on the very ground where a Black Maid had once believed she was invisible, an entire household had learned to see. And that day, everyone who crossed the threshold of the Kang estate remembered what true dignity looked like.